Today on The Nation Speaks, the abortion debate boils down to deciding between the rights of women versus the unborn, right? Or is a critical party missing? The father. Greg Mayo has been through it and shares how men too can suffer after abortion. Then in America Q&A, we find out if people across the country believe abortion can be traumatic for the man. Next, college sophomore Ellie Puentes got sick after her COVID shot. So when it came time for the booster, she said, no thank you. And her school said, see you later. Ellie says nothing she could do would change their mind. Finally, in our second America Q&A, we see what people think of Ellie's story. Should boosters be mandatory if someone had a bad reaction to the COVID shot? Hello and welcome to The Nation Speaks. I'm your host, Cindy Drucker. As you've no doubt witnessed in recent days, abortion is hyper-politicized. And the debate is always framed as a winner-takes-all battle over the rights of women versus the rights of the unborn child. But there's a third, invisible party whose interests get virtually no consideration at all: the father. Men might be blamed for playing a role in creating the pregnancy, but there's no thought at all that he might be impacted too by the ending of it. I just read a powerful new novel, Almost Daddy, by Gregory Mayo, about how traumatic abortion can be for the not-to-be father, too. Traumatic in ways society doesn't recognize, and many men in that position might not even realize themselves. Well, Greg is trying to change both of those things, and he joins us now. Greg Mayo is an author, speaker, movement maker, and part of the Men's Task Force with an organization called Support After Abortion. Greg, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Cindy. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Let's go back to your origin story, the 18-year-old Greg. Reading your book, although you say it's fiction, you did tell me that the opening scene is essentially what you experienced, sitting on the steps outside of an abortion clinic with your girlfriend and her mother inside, and you being hit by all sorts of conflicting thoughts and messages. Talk about that.
Yeah, so, and I always remind myself and people when I share this, I was an 18-year-old kid, and I really was a kid. On one side, up until the moment we ended up on those steps, I had been told over and over again, hey, it's not really a baby. It's just a clump of cells. It's not a thing. This is better for both of you. You're both young, yada, yada, all that stuff. But sitting there internally, in my gut, something just wasn't right, right? But I had nothing to validate that opinion, that thought process. And then afterwards, shortly afterwards, in the parking lot of the place, there were signs from, I say, Christian groups that said, baby killer, burn in hell, that kind of thing. So as a young man, a young kid, on one side, I'm told it's not really a person, which didn't seem to jibe with me. But on the other side, I'm told, well, God doesn't want you either now because you've done this, right? It was a very confusing time, especially for a young man.
So how did it impact you going forward? Were you aware that it impacted you?
Okay, so that's a great question. I wasn't consciously aware of it, not until my late 30s. But the acting out behaviors, the symptoms, the depression, the anxiety, the confusion, all that started happening pretty quick. By the end of the summer after my senior year of high school, my parents thought there was something seriously wrong with me. And there was. It's just nobody was talking about it. I remember talking to a therapist, and I shared with him about the abortion, and he said, well, okay, but that's not really a thing. And just glazed right over it. Obviously, nobody back in 1988 was talking about post-abortion recovery, especially for men. So I did what men do. I put it in a little box on the shelf and stuffed it away and tried not to deal with it. The unfortunate part is when we do that it comes out some other way, right? That pressure valve has to be released. And that's what the acting out behaviors were about.
So elaborate on that. How did it come out for you?
Well, one of the acting out behaviors of post-abortion syndrome or post-abortion stress is frequent job changes, for example. In the 6 months after graduation, I probably had 9 jobs. I couldn't hold a thought. I decided not to go to college. Toxic shame is one of the symptoms of post-abortion stress, and especially bad in men because our first job as men is to protect our families. And the first opportunity to have a family, we allowed, or sometimes some guys even pushed for, whatever the case may be, but we allowed our child to be killed. And we understand the difference between toxic shame and healthy shame, right? Toxic shame is I did wrong, or healthy shame, excuse me, is I did wrong. Toxic shame is I am wrong. And so I spent a couple decades thinking I was truly wrong. I was truly bad. I was unredeemable. It's risk-taking behaviors, right? Bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, cliff diving, all the stuff I was doing in my early 20s. I guess the best way I can explain it, Cindy, when you have a traumatic event and you stuff it and don't deal with that pain and anxiety and confusion, you end up doing other stuff. And for a lot of guys, that's risk-taking behaviors in hopes of feeling something.
Vaccine rules are relaxing in some places, but not on college campuses. Ellie Puentes was a pre-med sophomore at Union College in upstate New York. She got the vaccines as required to return to school in September and didn't react well, even ending up in the emergency room. So when the school mandated boosters a few months later, she applied for an exemption. And the school replied by telling her to pack up and go. Ellie, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Cindy. Thank you so much for having me.
Could you start by just setting the scene for us briefly? What's your background and what did it mean for you to go to college?
So, I'm a first generation Mexican student. My goal has always been going to college, be the first in my family to graduate. And I don't know, by this happening, it's a huge, it's very devastating for me because my one goal is just so easily taken away.
Tell us what happened after you got the second Pfizer shot.
So, yeah, I got sick right away. And prior to getting the vaccine, I had no health issues. And then a couple days later, my stomach lining inflamed that I had to go to the hospital. And I was there for about 6 hours. And, they couldn't give me any diagnosis as to why I got as sick as I did. They just diagnosed me with gastritis. And I still continue to have symptoms to this day from it.
In January, the school told you that you needed to have a booster. What did you tell the school and what was their reaction?
Yeah, so I got an email reminding me to get the booster, and I sent out an email with my concerns, everything that happened, me going to the hospital, and they denied that. So after that, I got a letter from my physician where he states it's ill-advised for me to receive the booster at the moment, and they denied that. I even went to the lengths of calling Pfizer themselves, them confirming that other patients had the same reaction, and it was still denied. There was nothing I was going to say that was going to change their mind. Their decision was final. I was expelled, and yeah, for prioritizing my health, they kicked me off campus. They gave me 72 hours to leave, and I'm not permitted back. I had no option. I even tried to speak to everyone in person. It was just either get the booster or you're out of school.
Here's that email. The vaccine is not associated with gastritis, which is the diagnosis you received in the ER 2 weeks after vaccination. But that's not actually what Pfizer says. In Pfizer's confidential clinical trial documents that the FDA was ordered to release in March, it lists the most commonly reported adverse reactions, and gastrointestinal disorders is a big one on the list. But the school told you that was not a valid reason to not get the booster.
That's exactly what happened. There really was nothing that I was going to say or that any medical professional was going to say that was going to change their mind.